Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. Um, I know we're about to get started here, so I really appreciate taking time out of your busy schedules to join this session. Yeah, if you're in the chat, would love to just see like where you're from. I'll put in the chat my information just so you have it. Um, I'll add my email. If you ever want to reach out, I'm always happy to answer any questions. Yeah, I'm currently based in Denver, Colorado, and I will add my LinkedIn profile as well in case you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. I have my colleague Scott on the call as well. He's going to be adding a few links to the chat. We built, and I'll be talking about this a little bit later as well, but we built a free tool for all the founders that are going to be here that are part of the Startup Grind community that can help you with your fundraising process. So this free tool, my colleague Scott will add the link to the chat. It's a tool to help you, as you're looking to fundraise or if you're currently fundraising, especially kind of as you're navigating these fundraising waters this year going to next year, this tool is going to be really helpful in making sure that you build out a really good fundraising process. And I'll be doing a quick demo at the end of this talk just on how to use that. But yeah, let's get started. So I'm really excited to be here. We're going to be talking a little bit about supercharging your fundraising process and investor outreach. So just to give you a quick high-level overview, if you're not familiar with the HubSpot for Startups program, we really focus on a couple core areas. So we provide a ton of educational resources. So we do workshops. If you go on our website, we have academy courses. So if you need any support around sales, marketing, service, we have those resources available for you. We also offer a ton of software integrations. And then the most important part, my colleague Scott on this call will add this as well, is we offer an up to 90% discount on our software. So if you're a part of the Startup Grind community, you have access to this 90% discount on HubSpot products. So definitely take advantage of that if you're on this call, because it's a really great resource we provide founders. So just covering real quick, if you're not familiar with HubSpot, we're an all-in-one solution. We help capture really the entire customer journey. So any sort of inbound, outbound communication, whether that's through email, LinkedIn, text, it's all being captured in one place, and it really gives you a 360-degree view of how you can support your prospects and customers better through their journey and working with your company. On top of that, we have sales tools, we have marketing tools, service tools, and on top of that. So, and like I said, in a second here, we also built this fundraising tool for founders. So we're really trying to help you in your whole journey of just not only supporting your prospects and your customers, but also we want to help you get more investor dollars, right? We want to make sure you're successful in that way too, especially with our startup program. We're always looking to better support the startup community. One other quick thing just about our free tools. Once you apply to our program, if you're just to give you a little bit of advice on our products, if you're pre-seed or in that ideation stage, usually the free tools are going to be good enough for you. So don't really, I wouldn't, if you're interested in some of the paid tools, maybe if you're Series A or raising, then it's going to be a better fit for you in those aspects. Just a quick background on myself. I'm currently based in Denver. Love hiking, so if you've ever been to Colorado, it's beautiful here. Definitely recommend taking a visit. I used to work for the NBA as a partner manager. Prior to HubSpot, I worked for Techstars for 2.5 years, where I managed all of the resources for the startups there and our global network partnership program. I've been with HubSpot for 2 years now, where I manage our West Coast operations, and always love supporting startups. So like I said, my email's in the chat. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I talk a lot about mental health for startups and founders, and just some of the resources we provide founders in the community. So today's agenda, I'll just cover this real quick. We're going to talk a little bit about the mindset of fundraising, what are some good best practices, and what are some things you should be thinking about as you're going through your fundraising journey. And then we're going to talk about the sources of capital, right? A lot of you might be a bit familiar with this, so I'm going to cover that a little bit quicker, just to give you a quick high-level overview of what are some of the ways you could get capital for your startup. Then we're going to define, what's an ideal investor profile, right? So not all investors are good investors. If you're, banging on the wrong door, it's going to be a waste of your time, right? So we're going to figure out, how do we identify who the best investor leads are for us. Then we're going to talk about, how do we actually build investor list. Then we're going to go into strategies for to get better investor introductions. So how do we get warm introductions by using your network? And then we're going to finish up with some tips, tricks, and best practices. And then, like I said, we're going to jump into the free tool. I'm going to show you around a little bit, give you some advice on, if you're interested in using the free tool, how do you best use it? Because it's, it's the fundraising waters are still pretty murky out there, and you want to get the best resources, the best tools out there to help you navigate those waters right now as you're fundraising. So let's jump into it. So I'll talk a little bit about the mindset and what you should be thinking about as you're going into fundraising. So when you're actively fundraising, it really feels like, that's the only thing you're working on all day, every day, right? So scalability and efficiency are really going to be the themes here. So figuring out what systems you should be using that'll allow you to do this better and faster are going to be so important as you're starting your fundraising journey. And also, setting expectations is important. Sometimes, when I speak to founders, they think that they'll talk to 5 investors and 3 of them are going to just write them checks, right? But a lot of us know on this call, unfortunately, that's not the reality of fundraising, right? You're going to have to reach out to dozens of investors to develop a pipeline that's big enough, right? So just setting expectations, it really does take a lot of time and energy and focus as you're going through that fundraising process. So that's just a quick high-level overview on the mindset. Let's jump into the actual process of fundraising, right, and talk a little bit about the why. So each one of these steps really could be in a masterclass in itself. And so we're going to be focusing today on number 4 and 5, but just to quickly cover what it takes for an investor outreach process, it's really these 5 steps. So first off is preparing your data and traction. And the reason I list this first is because oftentimes founders will start having conversations with investors without actually being prepared for that conversation. So in this first step, this is where you're preparing your data, right? Do you have the materials ready for what investors are going to ask for you? So a lot of my salespeople on this call, time kills deals. And if you have too much time between the back and forth and the due diligence process, that can really slow down your deal process. So having that data ready to go, especially those initial documents that investors are going to ask for, it's critical, right? And then second is creating your story. I think this is one of the most important aspects. So this is preparing and prepping your value proposition. This is practicing your pitch, right? I highly encourage you to do pitch competitions if you haven't done those. So getting that practice in, but more importantly, creating your story. It's so important to tell your story. Talk about your team. Like investors invest more sometimes in the team over your product. So you really got to share that story as best you can. But it's also helpful to hear you're presenting a business opportunity, right? You're selling part of your business. So investors, they need to be convinced that A, there's a real investable opportunity here, and B, that you and your team are the ones who are in the best position to capitalize or win that opportunity. And we'll dive into this a little bit later in the talk. And then 3 is determining your ask. So what do you want in return for selling that equity, right? How much funding are you seeking? I've included a bunch of resources in this slide deck that I'll show a little bit later, and happy to share this slide deck with you later if it's of interest to you. So feel free to shoot me an email if you're interested, but I'll share that a little bit later. And then next, we're going to be talking about identifying good fit investors, right? We're going to spend a good amount of time here because it's so important. So how do you identify who you should be reaching out to? How do you build those investor lists? And then lastly, like I said, we're going to dive into the repeatable, scalable outreach motion, and then how you can really accelerate your outreach process. So let's talk about finding investors, right? So how do you do that? First, I want to talk about the sources of capital before we jump into that, because this will give you a good idea of really thinking about how do I find those investors in each of these buckets. So a lot of you, like I said, are probably already familiar with these. So I'll just give like a quick overview on this. So first is crowdfunding platforms, right? So they're basically lots of individual investors all aggregated into one centralized location and who are contributing small amounts in exchange for either debt or equity. So there are crowd debt platforms and then equity, right? So some of the pros of crowdfunding is that it's easy, relatively speaking, to launch a campaign. And one of the cons is that there are different campaign rules. So you may need to hit, a minimum on certain campaign sites, or sometimes there's limits to the total raise. Second is government funding programs. So there's going to be, cities, county, states, and federal organizations that are providing capital in the form of business grants or matching capital allocations as well. And then bootstrapping your friends and family, right? I think that's relatively self-explanatory. And then you have angel investors. So once again, these are just large groups of investors that are coming together and screening deals or screening opportunities, right? So generally, angel investors, they're usually writing smaller checks. Usually it's mostly for pre-seed to Series A from groups of wealthy individuals. So the pros of going this route is it's usually a little more likely or easier to get in front of investors to pitch, and they're more likely to invest at those earlier stages. Some of the cons, though, are that those check sizes, like I said, they're usually smaller, and a lot of times it's just capital. So you're not getting those resources that you're going to get from like a VC or accelerator, which, obviously takes me to VCs, accelerators. A lot of us know what those are. Um, some of the really benefits of there is, like I said, like when I was at Techstars, we provided a huge network for founders and startups. So you have access to mentorship, partners, perks, like obviously like a HubSpot, Google, AWS, things like that. And then next, we have venture debt or venture loans, right? So most of us are familiar with credit. This is where instead of selling off your company, you're taking on debt. And one of the pros of this is you're not diluting your cap table or giving away equity. But um, one of the cons is that you're going to need collateral, right? So you're going to need to repay these funds as well. And generally, we see venture debt for a little bit later stage companies, usually not in the pre-seed. So let's talk a little bit about the ideal investor profile, which I think is super important, because you want to make sure you're not only finding an investor that's a good match for you, or the investors obviously want to find a good match for them, but you also want to make sure that the investor is a good match for you. So it's really important to think about this as you're going into your fundraising process, right? So first off, let's start talking about how investors are thinking about you. So as they're going into your meeting with you, this is what investors are typically thinking about as they're talking to you or as they're going into your meeting, right? So when you're interacting with an investor, this is usually their screening process that an analyst or a partner is doing in that conversation. They're looking at this as a due diligence process, right? So this is kind of that first stage of due diligence. And what are they thinking, or what are they trying to assess? Well, whether you're a good fit. So first off, that's an investment, right? So at a high level, do you fit the investment thesis of that investor, right? So that could be an average check size, for example. So if an investor is generally writing $2 to $5 million checks, and you're fundraising $50 million, and you want a $50 million investment from that investor, they're probably not in alignment, right? And vice versa, the same is true. So talking about funding stage, right? So if you're a pre-seed investor, so I'm talking about this from an investor side. So if you're a pre-seed investor, it's not a great idea to go source from private equity companies, which are obviously much larger stage, which have much larger stage companies, right? So making sure there's alignment on the funding stage is super important as well. Also, location specific, right? Some investors have regional thesis where I only invest in companies, for example, in the Southeast or in San Francisco, Washington, things like that, right? So if you're not in one of those areas and you're working with an investor that has a more regional thesis, you're probably not a good fit for that investor as well. Are they focused on B2B versus B2C, right? What vertical, what sector do they focus on? What philosophical alignment do they have, right? So if I'm an investor focused on climate investing and I have an oil company startup, probably not the best fit there either, right? And then lastly, are they actively investing or not? This is something to be navigating right now too, right? I think next year will be a little bit better, but sometimes investors will be willing to have a conversation with you because once again, deal flow is their lifeblood. But it's important to assess, okay, are they actually investing or am I just kind of having a conversation for down the road? And then the next category, once they've assessed, okay, at a high level, this startup or this founder is a good fit. Next is to say, okay, they meet my parameters, but are they themselves or is this opportunity a good investment? So how they're assessing this is going to be in a few different ways, right? And every VC is going to be slightly different, but in an aggregate, they're usually thinking about first off, do you have a large enough TAM or total addressable market? VCs or investors generally have a bias for larger total investable markets just because there's more opportunity for green space, but there are also niche investors as well. So think about that too. So second is, do you have a good management team? I talked a little bit about this earlier. Um, because are you a are you and your co-founder or your team the right team to bring this to fruition, which I think is always one of the most important things that VCs or accelerators look for when they're thinking about investing in startups. So they want to see, some sort of experience in that space. So as you're doing like pitch competitions, make sure your team, that story is front and center when you're pitching to investors. And then next is product market fit. So how mature is your product? Have you gone to market? What has been the market feedback or reaction? Do you have traction? All these things are going to be so important to show how established your product is when you're talking to VCs. And then next is competitive advantage. So what's your competitive advantage, right? Why do you have the ability to capitalize on this product versus other competitors, right? And then next is strong metrics and forecasted growth, right? So investors want to invest in an opportunity they think they could get an increase and get a return from. So show your strong metrics and show the potential growth that you have. And then lastly is good business foundation, right? So do you have a lot of tech debt? Are you still using Google spreadsheets? If you're like a later stage company and you're still using 20 different products, try to bring that in and try to consolidate those products because a lot of investors want to make sure you're using the right products for the right stage of your company. So that was high level about what investors are thinking about when they're talking to you. Which now I want to talk a little bit about what you should be thinking about when you're talking to investors yourself, and that usually falls into three buckets, right? So alignment, network, terms, and track record. So I put alignment first, and I put in is their personality fit and trust at the top. So this is an investor who's likely going to be on your cap table, right? And you're going to be having conversations, interactions, and working with them to some degree on a reoccurring basis. You're giving up also a board seat as well. So this person or these individuals, these investors, they're not going to be going away. So is there a personality fit? Are you going to have issues working with this team on a consistent basis? These are going to be your long-term partners. Think about it. Think about this more of like a marriage rather than just a one-off conversation, right? Two, more autonomy or more hands-on. So is this investor, so knowing yourself, knowing your business and what you need, is this going to be an investor who's writing a check and then just walking away, or are they going to have some sort of operational role within your company? So understanding, what you need and what it is that they're going to deliver do they share the same vision and understand your vision? So making sure that there's an alignment there with where you want to take the company, and that ties into that exit strategy as well, right? So making sure that they want to have the same exit strategy that you have, and that they have the same vision that you have as well, right? So if those two things are out of alignment, that's going to cause a lot of friction. So it's so important that you're finding somebody that shares that same philosophical alignment as you. Next is going to be on terms and track record, right? So if you've received an offer, which would be great, or a term sheet, are you comfortable with those terms that are on that term sheet? One big thing that founders sometimes miss out on is having a conversation with previous founders who've received an investment from that investor, right? So ask some of the other founders in their network or in their portfolio, what was their experience like? Are they happy with the arrangement? Ask them, ask them those questions, because I'm sure an unhappy founder, they're going to want to talk to you and give you advice on if this is going to be the right fit for you as well. Another thing you can inquire about is, have they had success with similar companies to you, right? Do they have experience to help you reach that next level and get to that next level? And that really ties into that next step of operator experience, right? And performance track record as well. So just understanding whether they're a quality investor, and can they help grow companies like yours. And then lastly is network, right? So who do they co-invest with? Can they help you get other introductions? Can they do anything beyond just writing a check for you? So understanding what you need. And then lastly, will they participate in further down rounds, later down rounds, right? And typically that answer is yes. So really, it's so important as you're going into a fundraising process that you want this to be a partnership, and then it's not one-sided. Um, okay, so I went over that relatively quickly. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to put that in the Q&A. Happy to go over that afterwards. So I'm going to jump into building and qualifying investor lists. I'll go through this pretty quickly, but there's free investor lists, right? One resource is the SBIC directory. They have, so this is a government organization. They have phone numbers of investors who are actively investing. And like I said, I have links in this chat here that you can use. So the overall pros and cons of free investor lists is that it's free. Well, the pros are free. Cons are that it's sometimes out of date. Next is, a lot of us probably use this, but paid investor list, right? So Crunchbase, PitchBook. One piece of advice for this is you could always, sign up for a membership for 1 month, download the information you need, and then cancel if it's something you don't want to continue doing. So really think about some of these paid investor lists. One important feature of this is that screening functionality, so you can dig into like what investors are investing into. Like I said, some of the things that I mentioned, like your companies, what funding levels are they investing in, things like that. So this is a really powerful tool to help you learn more about these investors that you're thinking about working with. So finding contact information for investors. This is a challenge that a lot of founders face. Like, how do I find their emails? Where are some best ways I could find the investors' contact information? So a couple just easy ways I'm sure a lot of you have used, like tweet, email, LinkedIn messages, things like that. I love using LinkedIn for messaging other investors or messaging founders. And it's, if you're putting together the right message, it's going to be successful. The two other products to use are Hunter.io and ZoomInfo. Those are really good tools to find emails for investors as well. So that just talked a little bit about some strategies about finding contact information. Now let's talk a little bit about finding or the best way to find investor introductions, right? So first off, these are some truisms just for introductions, right? And asking for warm intros. So you're extending what I call social capital when you're making an ask to an investor, right? So if I go up to someone on the ventures team and I say, hey, I'd like to make an introduction to XYZ investor that you have a relationship with, what I'm really doing is that employee or that contact that I have and that I'm asking them to spend some of their social capital with that investor connection, right? So if I'm a founder and I'm going to one of my contacts and I'm asking them for an introduction to an investor, that's spending their social capital, right? So you want to be smart and making sure that you're also providing them really good resources when they're going into that introduction, right? Because they're taking a risk on their social capital. Because if they say for just example, they make this introduction and it doesn't pan out, then they go back to that investor again. They're probably not that investor is probably not going to be open to making that introduction. But with that social capital aspect, if they make an introduction and you're a great founder and things go well, that person is you're helping their social capital as well. So you want to make sure like you're going into a lot of these introductions with the right frame of mind, and how are you thinking about helping your contact make the introduction for you. So some ways we can improve upon this process is doing everything we can to remove friction in that introduction process, right? So to boost some warm intros, we want to make their lives easier. So for example, if I want to make an investor introduction, what I could do is I could draft up an email for the person I'd like to do the introducing. So what I could do is I don't want to create work for them, right? So if you're going to somebody, try to have an email teed up for them so they can just make their lives as easy as possible, because they're not going to just write an email for you out of the blue, right? So try to have an email teed up for them. Next is if I have an email saying, hey, here's a draft of what you could send to contact XYZ, feel free to edit it. Would that be helpful in getting an intro? The likely answer is yes. So try to do something you can do that's simple and easy and smooth for them in that relationship, right? Something that you can do that you can get help to get their message across is, ask if they're not willing to just write an email for you, and ask them if they're willing to pass your contact information off to them, right? So instead of asking for a direct introduction, you can say, hey, I have all this teed up. Here's my pitch deck. Here's my, whatever information you want to convey. Would you be willing to send this to your contact, right? So that's a little bit less of an ask, and could potentially be another strategy for still getting your pitch deck or your information in front of the contact or in front of the investor that you wanted. And then lastly is to meet them yourself. So ask a question to yourself: where do investors hang out, right? They hang out at networking events. Second is pitch competitions, right? They're at pitch competitions. That's why I said that's so important. Try to do pitch competitions, because firstly, you can get direct investments there, right? But you're also getting practice on your pitch. You're also getting introductions. There's so many benefits of doing pitch competitions. And then lastly, where are investors, right? Go to events, go to your local startup grind chapters as much as you can. Like, go to different areas that you can meet investors, because they're going to be a lot of investors. They have goals to have deal flow. So you're going to have an opportunity if you're getting out there and meeting with them it's going to really increase your opportunity of meeting good investors. So the final piece before we actually walk through the tool itself, I just want to give you some really quick high level tips, tricks, and best practices. So one, stay organized, right? This can be a hectic process, and making sure that you have the materials that you need, that make sure they're organized, make sure they're up to date. This is going to help you have a smooth outreach process. Next, develop a scalable process, right? And we're going to cover a couple ways to build efficiency into that outreach. But as with everything else that's in your business, you're gonna be trying to develop a scalable process. So one day you can likely hand that off, right? Fundraising isn't necessarily something you can hand off, but you need to develop a process for it so you can help your team become more efficient. Next is to qualify investors quickly, right? And I talked a little bit about this, but just like with sales, with which most of you have experience with, a bad fit investor is a waste of time. So getting a quick no is better than a long-term no, right? But either way, just make sure that you're reaching out to the investors that have a chance of forming a connection with you, that have a chance of communicating with you. And then next is is mentally prepare, right? Develop thick skin. You're going to get a lot of no's. Hopefully you'll get some yeses in there, but just be mentally prepared going into this process. It's going to be long. It's going to be hard sometimes, but if you develop processes that set you up for success, when you get those no's, you continue to try, continue to work hard. So when you do get that yes, you really feel good about yourself and you're setting yourself up to get more yeses in the future. Um, and then, even if they say no is not the right time, you can still find value in the relationship, right? Do you have an investor newsletter? If a lot of the founders on this call don't have an investor newsletter, get an investor newsletter, make an investor newsletter, right? If they say no, now is not the right time that you're working with these investors, you could say, hey, can I add you to my investor newsletter, and reach out again in 6 months to see how, and you could show them that your traction's gotten better, right? If that's something that the investor said is missing. So try to create an investor newsletter. It's super helpful as you're going through this process. So like I said, I have some additional resources in here. Happy to share those with you if you send me an email. Um, if you're an underrepresented founder on this call, I also have some really good underrepresented founder resources here. How do you present your story? Determining your ask, finding good fit investors, and investor lists. So let's jump into the tool itself. So like I said, my colleague Scott, he put in the chat a link. This is a tool we built just exclusively for Startup Grind founders. So this is a tool that's going to help you become more efficient and more effective at your fundraising process, right? Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Happy to go through this. So to start, this is the main page that we structured just for you. So this is going to outline all of your investors in one place. So once you sign up for the tool, you're going to be able to upload your investor into here. And a lot of these things, these are going to be customizable as well. So from here, let's click on one of these investors so I can show you kind of how this looks as you're starting to think about, building a better investor process, right? So at a high level, HubSpot is comprised of contacts, companies, and deal records, right? Which are all tied together. So this is going to be your main page. All these contacts, the deal records, everything is going to be all in one. That's why we call HubSpot kind of this all-in-one solution, right? So on the left-hand side, you'll find summary of information, much of which is automatically populated through HubSpot insights, which makes it easy, right? So you're not having to go in and manually do this yourself, waste time. We automatically, a lot of times, put this information for you. You'll also see a summary of business operations, right? Like regular business operations. So you have activities, notes, emails, calls, and I'll show you emails here in a second, which we'll do shortly. And then you can make phone calls. You could have tasks, meetings, right? And on the right-hand side, like I was showing earlier, it'll show you all your contacts that are associated with, for this example, HubSpot Ventures. So you get a good sense of like, who are the contacts at this VC, right? And then you also can see deals associated with that. So what are the funding opportunities? Let me go a little bit more to the right here. You can see all the funding opportunities that this VC is having with you, these conversations. So it's really easy and manageable to have in one place. And then you also have a few other functions, but that's kind of on the outside scope here. So since I've identified Scott as a good, for example, I've identified Scott as a good fit investor for this example, right? So included in this fundraising portal, we've built out templates for you all. So what I'll do here is, I'll kind of delete this so you can see the example, is we built, so these are going to be all pre-populated in the free tool that I've shared with you. So for this example, we have an intro investor outreach email. So templates are incredibly helpful because you're not having to manually write out these emails to investors every time. This is going to be something that's going to help you scale your process a lot better. So with these templates, you can add things. We've already added things like the pitch deck or any videos you want to share, any data or traction. It's so important because when you're writing these templates out, you don't want it to be, 2 pages long. You want to keep it really concise and to the point, because the investors aren't going to want to read, 30 different things. They want to read certain things, and we've built this template specifically for you on that aspect. So um, with just a couple touches, you could send this email right to Scott. Easy process, add your meeting link so there's no back and forth. Next, what you can do is you can set a follow-up task. So say, I want to follow up with Scott in a few days. Really easy to set up follow-up tasks to ensure that you're staying on top of your communication. And one other thing that's kind of cool, sorry, I'm losing my voice here, is you can see, how many times did Scott open this email. So kind of creepy, but it's really cool, insightful for you to see, like, is Scott engaged with my email that I'm sending out? How many times has he opened it, right? And that's so important because, you want, if the investor, like I was saying, if they're not engaging with your emails, maybe it's time to move on to another investor, right? So I can get in all of this information and understand, what's working and what's not working. So another thing I wanted to show you with the email. So say, okay, I sent out the first email. We also built a second outreach email, keep it concise, would love to schedule a meeting with you. One other thing that's I didn't show in here, but from this email, you can automatically create a to-do task. So once I send this email, I can, say, hey, I want to follow up with Scott in 2-3 business days, etc. Just really helpful to make sure that you're staying on top of your investor outreach process. Okay, so one thing I want to show you too in this process is, okay, you sent out the email. Now we're starting to see some really good traction. Scott's booked a meeting with me. He's asking for my pitch deck. You're starting to see some really good momentum in this process, right? So from here, I wanted to show you another cool feature that we built out for you in this process, and that's pitch decks, right? So we in this free tool that we built for you, we also have included a free pitch deck for you that you can use, a free pitch deck template. And one of the cool things here is that you can see all the information from this pitch deck, right? So how many visitors have looked at my pitch deck? How many views has it had? You're gonna have a lot of this data here. How much time did they spend on my pitch deck, right? So this is really important as you're starting to build out assets for your company, to have all this data, because you're gonna be able to just really build a much more scalable, efficient process. And us including this pitch deck template in there, we wanna make sure you're saving time in creating a pitch deck that's gonna be relevant to VCs, and other investors that you're working with. So one other thing I wanted to show you just quickly is you can also have all of your tasks in one place, right? So like I was mentioning earlier, that follow-up process is so important. So you sent out that first email, you included a pitch deck. Now I want to make sure I'm just really staying on top of that follow-up process. The task function is so important here because it's sending you reminders like, hey, don't forget to reach out to this investor. I have a $5 million investment conversation coming up with them. I need to put together a presentation, things like that. So this task function is so important when you're thinking about that follow-up process. So let's click on deals. So this is another function that's so important because it's going to help you organize all of how much revenue or how much fundraising am I actually doing, right? So through HubSpot, you have the ability to effectively, like I said, track your tasks, send emails, upload documents, ramp up your outreach efforts. When you have investors in your contact list, so you're starting to see some traction, right? You're starting to have conversations about fundraising, and all these functions I said are pre-programmed in this tool. So one of the cool things with deals is this is useful not only for fundraising, but for also sales and regular business development motions, right? So you can easily toggle between different pipelines. So the preferred view, which I recommend, is bucketed by deal stages here, right? So investor reply received, an investor call scheduled. It's important to make these deal stages factual and inspectable and focusing on certain milestones, because this approach really eliminates subjective assessments. So as you're moving forward in like the investment process, a lot of these things, which I'll show you here, is it shows you also like, is this how's this conversation going? Medium, is there a high chance this person's going to invest in me? Medium chance. So we give you all of these insights to help you become more effective in your investor outreach. And so just to give you a quick example, I know we're running short on time. So the deal process, it's also really similar to what I was showing with you to like a company record. So you can see all of their, how much investor amount. You can do emails directly from here, calls directly from here. Just a great way to organize and see, you know, how much revenue or how much fundraising, how much investment is this investor going to be giving me. One last thing that I think is super helpful to you as well, because we know like, you know, reporting is super important when it comes to investing. And one of the things that's important when you're looking at, you know, reporting or dashboards is with these pre-built dashboards that we built up for you all, is once you start uploading your data, you can see, you know, where is there fall off in my investment outreach process? You know, is it taking me too long to send documents to the investor? And is that maybe where, you know, there's some drop off here? So a lot of these dashboards and reports, they're all customizable to your kind of process. But having this data at your hands, it's going to help you build a more scalable, efficient process. Where am I dropping balls? Where am I doing really well in the investor process? Let's really focus in on there. So giving this all of this data and information to your team, it's going to help you become more effective. So so yeah, from there, like I said, you know, if you have any questions, always happy to answer them. I know we're just jumped on time, or short on time, but yeah, happy to answer any questions that have come up. I think, okay, so Amy, I think this is a quick answer I could do. Travis and so maybe if you if you want to shoot me an email after this conversation, be happy to talk you through this. But what kind of outreach tactics will turn investors off instantly? I think spamming them, not making it, you know, personable. So with a lot of these templates like that we built out, you know, you can make them personalized. So we have personalization tokens, like make sure you're including their first name, the VC that they're working with. You just don't want to create a process where it's just general emails that you're sending them. Personalize it as much as you can. Don't spam them. I said earlier in the presentation, you don't want to be sending like 3 pages of an email. You want to make it concise, to the point, as best you can when you're reaching out to these investors. Um, so Sarah, all of what I showed is in the free version. So when you sign up for through the link that I shared, all of that's included in the free version. So definitely take advantage of that. Um, and then, yeah, I think we're out of time. But like I said, let me put my email again in the chat. I didn't get to a lot of the questions, but I want to make sure that I connect with you all afterwards. And like I said, my colleague Scott included um, a few resources here in the chat as well. So take advantage of those. But yeah, just want to thank everybody for their time today. Hope you enjoyed the session, and I look forward to seeing you all throughout the summit. So thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.